Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Wrench. My name is Jay Goninen, and I am your host. Today I have with me Murray Voth, president of RPM Training. Murray is one of Canada's most knowledgeable experts on the automotive industry, especially as it relates to business development of the independent automotive service and repair sector. He focuses in improving profitability, best practices in management, financial management, systems implementation, human resources, leadership, and pretty much everything. Murray's a rock star. He's anything you got, you can throw his way. And really, I think a lot of what you do, spending time researching a lot of the issues that the industry is facing from a macro and micro level, and really just bringing education and training and coaching solutions to all of his clients. So Murray, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here today. I've been looking forward to this one for a while. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. And I've been looking forward to this too, because when we first met, I think we talked for 2 hours about all the issues that we deal with. It's kind of like we should have recorded our first conversation, right?
I think so. And anybody that knows me just knows that I'm a geek when it comes to the service business and trying to learn more and get better. And I felt like in even just our intro call, I learned so much about the industry and just, I don't know, it's something I think you learn something, you take pieces as you do the podcast over and over again, but just was blown away by you in that first conversation. And I'd followed you from afar for a long time. So having this conversation today is one that I've really been looking forward to.
Well,
let's talk about, well, thank you. Let's talk about how you got into this in the first place. What led you to the automotive service business?
Well, back in the 80s, there was a lot of unemployment. I originally did my commercial pilot's license. That was going to be the career that I was going to do. And of course, there was no jobs in that field. And so I got a job at a service station as a car wash attendant and a cashier. And the owner was working with some other investors on expanding his network of service stations and asked if I could do research and development, because I had worked on again, it was a lot of unemployment. So I was working on a unemployment program where I was doing a research project for a community organization, so social services type thing. And he was on the board of that, and he said, "Well, why don't you come do that for me?" So we bought a couple of service stations, or the group did. I became a shareholder in time, and we were going to flip them all. Well, that didn't go so well because there was nobody buying service stations besides us. So we started operating them, and they said, "You're kind of a mechanical guy. You want to start running one with bays," and that's the beginning. Of course, personally, as an individual, that term "lifelong learner" is kind of used over and over again. But I've avid reader from very young, continued to read, listen to books, podcasts, and stuff. I have been asked over the years, "How do you know what you know, or what you do?" And it kind of sounds like you're introducing me like you're bragging about all the stuff I know. Well, it comes from 36 years of hard knocks, mistakes, learning, watching other people. But it also comes from a couple of things. One, I have a social media agency that I've hired to help promote me and do my marketing. And I'm trying to be a role model to my clients with that. And they're looking for content. And I saw some trophies on this bookshelf behind me that you see. You can't see the trophies. From Toastmasters. I don't know how many people listening are familiar with the Toastmasters clubs, but I got to tell you, fantastic opportunity for public speaking skills and leadership skills. I was part of a club for, I think, 8 years. I personally didn't have a fear of public speaking. I'm a defective human. Apparently 99% of humans are afraid of public speaking. I didn't have that. I think I was just a comedian and a show-off from the day I was born. But Toastmasters was so powerful for me to concentrate my thoughts, communicate. And so I find when anybody, and you know this because you're in the communication business, when you learn to communicate effectively, people listen to you. Even though you might have something simple to say, I tell even the youngest person, you might have a simple idea to communicate, just learn how to communicate it and you'll get further. And then the other part is great people that have brought me along, right? Didn't do very well in my early years in business. The gas bar, convenience store, car wash, I don't know. That one wasn't hard. I was a natural at that. Got to the bays, and that was hard. That was just a whole other animal. So Bob O'Connor. I mean, some of your listeners will remember Bob O'Connor back in the day. Was a business coach that I hired. I was with him and his 20 groups for kind of 11, 12 years. I got a chance to work with the oil company as a trainer. They trained me. So I had some mentors within the oil company. They trained me with the territory managers. And next thing you know, I have some abilities that, doing dealer development. And I looked at Bob O'Connor in my mind, I said to myself, someday I want to be like him. And here I am. So I've been doing it for 17 years. So I tell people, read voraciously, listen, draw people around to challenge you. We each have people in our lives that have supported us. My wife has been an amazing support through everything. She is a businesswoman on her own right. She used to do public relations in a different job. And she is probably my biggest consultant when we talk about ideas and projects and stuff like that. So again, we've been really privileged and blessed to be together for 42 years through thick and thin, through all that. So I would probably say she's probably the biggest reason that I can sort of get a little bit emotional here talking about that. So her. And sort of one other piece I want to communicate to people is work with the strengths that you have, right? And you can't be all things to all people. There's things that I'm not that good at that I hire people to do for me, right? So, and work with your own talents. So yeah, I do believe that we can all be really influential people in whatever our sphere is, right? I just happen to have some openings in a unique field that got me here. So yeah, so I hope people listening can pick up on whatever their field of work is that you can actually become, an expert in your field. So yeah.
We're going to pick your brain on a lot of this stuff. A couple things that really stuck out to me. I went through Toastmasters myself, and it's one of those things where it's probably been a decade ago that I had done that. And I almost feel like I should go back and do it again because it was such an impactful and powerful thing to do. And it's so helpful. I love that. I love the intentional way you go about educating yourself and reading. That's something that I had a mentor when I was younger that would that really shine that light on me. But I think the last point you made was one that maybe took me the longest to really understand, which is everybody's got strengths and weaknesses, and you can't be all things to everybody. Yeah. And it took me I think I'm still learning that. Like it is something that is really hard to come to terms with.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing I would encourage you, everybody, I am a business coach or whatever you want to call me, they're different titles, but I too have a coach, executive coach, Brenda.
Interesting.
And her approach, I mean, obviously, different approaches with different people, but what I have found useful is looking at blind spots that we have that we don't, how do you know that you have it when you're blind to something, right? And, in the coaching agreement I have with my clients and her coaching agreement with me, it mentions that if there's, mental health issues and depression and, you're going to go get help from somebody else, right? I'm not going to solve your your issues that way. But she has helped me identify over time strengths and weaknesses and why something was a weakness. So if we're okay going down this path, I think people will be encouraged by Murray talking about some lessons he learned from his coach. So another good friend of mine who is an expert in leadership and psychology, and he is again a friend and a mentor in some of my material. He put me through a industrial psychology assessment. He had got his hands on, really high end executive assessment, right? And he calls me on the phone and says, "Man, Murray," he said, "you are off the scale on the ability to react to unexpected circumstances." He said, "Your ability to deal with the unexpected as it comes to you is absolutely amazing," right? He said, "But your planning," he says, "is like doesn't even know how hard to even appear." And I'm like, "Okay, so what?" He says, "Well, don't you see the correlation?" He says, "If you would plan more, chances are you probably wouldn't have to be so reactive on the other end." So we had a really good conversation, and it was a bit of an eye-opener. Of course, he emails me. This is before pre-COVID. emails me and said, have you booked all of your flights and your rental cars, right? Because sometimes I would show up at an airport not having booked my rental car, right? And then that's really expensive because the last car there was a Caddy, or I'm now taking the bus or an Uber somewhere because I couldn't get a car, right? Anyways, it was a fun exercise, and it kind of just sort of sat there, and I didn't really do a lot with it. And as I formed RPM 5 years ago, working with Brenda even prior to that, and we started talking about planning. We started talking about calendars and started talking about stuff like that. And I said, oh, it's just such a hassle. She said, I can just do it. I just have it all in my head. And so she asked me pointed questions, why this and why that? And she's sort of digging in. And I came to realize that as a child, we had moved so many times that I had gone to 9 schools in 12 years.
Wow.
So think about your investment in planning as a kid. Do you invest in long-term friendships? Do you invest in planning even in high school? Like, do you invest in getting in a sports team? I mean, I got decent grades and everything like that. I mean, my parents really encouraged me with that part of it. And I'm not complaining about my childhood. There was nothing wrong with it. It's just That was the reality of the moves. It gave me the strength of being able to meet people, Jay, because I'm making new friends every year. So that's a skill. I can walk into a full room of strangers and just say hi, start shaking hands and talk. I don't care. What are you going to do to me? Hit me like you haven't met me yet, right? So that was the strength. But there's no investment. And so all of a sudden, with her guidance, I'm like, this bomb explodes in my head. Like, well, no wonder I wouldn't invest. So she says, well, what do you think you start investing now? She said, you're at whatever age, it probably makes some sense with the business to do that. And Jay, I got to tell you, my Google Calendar is just to my right on my other screen here, and I can't live without that thing. I'm booking for April of 2024, dude.
Wow.
All because of Brenda asking me key questions. And now I love planning. I have tools, software. By the way, software has helped. Having a Google Calendar versus a book calendar back in the day, obviously software is much more intuitive. I don't have to write. I can type. My handwriting is horrible. And that. So just to give an example to people is with help, people help us with our blind spots, right? That's one of the reasons why I love what I do. So
I think people would be surprised to learn that you have a coach.
Probably. Yeah.
Right? I don't think when you envision a coach, you don't envision them asking for help. But if you think about it, you're taking your own advice, right? You're taking what you do every day and you're implementing it in your own life. And I think that's such a smart way of going about things.
Yeah. I mean, her role and what we work on is different than what I work on. We don't do a lot of numbers per se. I mean, we talk about my goals, my business plan, and a bit of that kind of stuff. But a lot of it is the sort of foundational executive skills, right? Like delegation, planning, goal setting vision, value statements, setting value propositions, understanding, how to become. Oh man, I have to be careful because the word influencer has some very irritating connotations to an old guy, right? So I'm not on TikTok yet, but we talked about 3 or 4 years ago. She said, "What is one of the things you want to do in your industry?" I says, "Well, I want to be able to influence people." I said, "Never mind coaching individuals and businesses and making my living, building a business and doing well financially." I said, "But I would like to influence the industry because out of that will get more business for me, and I'm contributing back. I want to be able to be that piece." So we actually created some strategies around becoming a thought leader, right? Which is kind of what you do, Jay. Like you're a thought leader with your podcast, right?
Yeah.
And so, by the way, being on your podcast, I mean, when we made the plan, you weren't an acquaintance yet,
right?
But part of the plan was to join podcasts as a thought expert with people, be a guest, and see if I could help that person out with what they're doing. And next thing you know, you get more phone calls. And next thing you know, you get more business. And now I'm having 2 calls a week through my website. And I'm asking all these new people, where did you hear of me? And they're like, well, I heard you on that podcast. I heard you on that podcast, right? So I'm trying to role model that for my clients. How do you communicate about your shop in that way? So maybe you don't join podcasts because your buying public is not being on that part of it, but are you being a thought influencer in your own community, right? So, for those shops that are listening, maybe you're involved in sports sponsorships. Being in Canada, it's very common to sponsor on the boards of the hockey rink, right? And having your logo in the hockey rink, or a curling rink. Obviously, your listeners in Nevada and Arizona are like, "What's a curling rink?" It's where you throw a really heavy round rock down a sheet of ice at other people at the other end, and it's actually quite fun. But so I said to folks, so you've sponsored this board, you've sponsored you're a hockey team in your town, that kind of stuff. I said, do you advertise the hockey team's team schedule on Facebook? Oh, I never thought of that. I know a shop in, where are they now? They're in the prairies of Canada somewhere. People go to their Facebook page to find out the farmers market times faster than they go to the farmers market's page, because the social media person for the farmers market is so, whereas the social media person for the shop is quite active. And so that's the same thing. A shop can also influence their community by participating in things that are important to the community, whether it's the sports, whether it's the farmers market, whether, I know a guy that's built a whole business being part of a young dads group on Facebook.
Wow.
Like, they're talking about parenting issues, right? And then somebody says, sorry, I'm late for the parenting Zoom. I had a flat tire. And Chris says, well, I fix cars, right? and he says, here's the number of my, so he'll put it in the chat, here's the number of my service advisor, give him a call and get them to look after it, and carries on talking with other dads about parenting issues, right? So the thing about this, Jay, is human beings need connection. We need support from each other. None of us can do this alone. That expression about it takes a village to raise a child, for goodness sakes, it took a village to raise a business coach, and I believe that your listeners and my clients and the people that we work with together can really influence their communities in many ways when they begin to think of, well, what do people need? Everybody needs their car fixed. They can choose from 7 other shops in your community, but, are you visible at that hockey game, right? Are you wearing that hockey team's jersey? Are people aware that, you donate a couple of grand a year to the jerseys of that hockey team? Are you aware of, are you involved in disaster relief? Are you out there picking up pieces after a tornado? Are you, there was a guy, again, back to curling, a curling rink burned down in Eastern Canada. And there's a challenge. Oh, by the way, let me digress a bit more, Jay. There's a challenge in small town North America. Business people think that what we teach about business doesn't apply in small town. That wouldn't work in my town, right? Because, the big city, it works. But in my town, I couldn't do that kind of stuff. The math is all there. It all works. I can convince people of that, show them that. But there is a feature of small town that is a challenge in some of our areas of our continent. And that is this idea that if I make too much money, people are going to know that, and they're going to stop coming to my business, right? There's that, you made money off my back, right? I see you smiling.
100.
Right?
I grew up in a small town shop. I absolutely know what you're talking about.
And so people talking behind your back and stuff like that. So this one guy told me, this is years ago now, it came up what we all drove, and he was driving like a 98 Ford F-150. And this would have been in 2009 or 10, right? So whatever, that's a 20-year-old truck. So I was saying, dumb Westerner, like, well, why don't you just buy a new truck? I mean, look at the image that you're giving. You're driving an old truck. He says, if I bought a new truck, I'd lose half my customers. Right? And I says, you're serious? He says, and everybody in the room is like, yeah, you're serious. I'm just like, that's depressing, right?
Work hard to
well, what I found
lifestyle.
out? What I find out is they let the outside of the house look run down, but when you go on the inside, it's a palace, 80-inch TVs, the whole bit, right? Like it's a whole game, right? Plus, apparently, there's a way of avoiding the taxman if your place looks run down too, right?
Yeah.
But the beauty of it is, and this is maybe a combination of Toastmasters. I think my sort of comedic old dad joke person. I've had lame humor since I was born. That I get these ideas. I get these weird ideas for my clients. And I said, I was aware of the curling rink had burnt down in the town, right? I said, so if you donated $5,000 to the rebuilding effort, could you buy a newer truck? Well, he said, easy. And he did. He bought a 3-year-old truck. He donated $5,000, right? And the guy's an absolute hero, right? He drives around his new truck. Oh, there's the guy that gave $5,000 to the curling rink, right? So that's one tiny example, and it doesn't always have to be money, right? It could be time, it could be a gift, it could be an effort, it could be a suggestion. Some of us are super busy. We can't maybe give a lot of time, but we can make a quick suggestion, or we can make a quick introduction to somebody. I love introducing people, right? I know a shop owner who just sold his place. He doesn't want to be in business anymore because of his family and lifestyle. So older gentleman, he's got grandkids coming and stuff, but he's got an accounting background. So he's actually starting a bookkeeping firm. So I lost the client because he's now sold the shop and the new owner doesn't want to participate in coaching, whatever. I never take that stuff personally.
Right.
But I've been able to introduce him to 2 accounting firms that specialize in accounting for automotive shops, who are always looking for good bookkeepers, right? So what did that take me? Like 30 seconds to introduce 3 people together in an email? I got nothing out of that per se, and I don't care to, but man, right? What if that relationship blossoms and he gets a bunch of clients? And the beauty of it is he's been coached now for 7 years by me. Who knows? He may become a coach.
Right.
Right? On his own.
Right.
He might start his own coaching company, right? Or he might circle back to me and say, hey, Murray, you got room for another guy, right? So I'm just, maybe you caught me on a good day, Jay, but when we are willing to give of ourselves in that type of a sort of a positive way, not a dysfunctional way, there's people that reach out to me and I'll just say, I'm really sorry. I'm not interested in that idea or that product at this time. Maybe circle back to me in 6 months, and maybe they do or maybe they don't, and we just move on, right?
Right.
That way. So, yeah.
Did you hear the news? WrenchWay is launching local chapters across the U.S. WrenchWay local chapters bring together the best shops and dealerships with schools, technicians, and other industry professionals with the goal of promoting and improving auto and diesel careers in local communities. WrenchWay's local online communities provide a detailed look at what it's like working at the best shops in the area, an effective way for schools to connect with local shops and dealerships, an engaging forum for members to discuss industry topics, and a fun way to win prizes while helping the industry and local schools. WrenchWay local chapters are now available in Charlotte, Dallas, Fort Worth, Denver, Detroit, Houston, Indianapolis, Madison, Milwaukee, the Twin Cities, Philadelphia, Phoenix, Portland, and Raleigh, with more chapters coming soon. Learn more and join wrenchway.com/local-chapters. Link is in the show notes.
It's very interesting stuff, and I think that's where I've, in your content that you've done, and something that I think you just naturally have, which is just likability, right? And like the fact that you're just, you just talked about how somebody could potentially come back and be your competitor, and you're like, yeah, whatever. Like, and I think there's so many shops out there that could use that same mentality, right? Where if there's so many, we hear from shops that they're terrified of training their technicians because they're afraid they'll leave. And it's like, that is such a bad mindset to have, right?
Yeah. Well, what is that expression, Jay? Train them and they leave, or don't train them and they stay? Right.
Yeah. It's a Richard Branson quote that is so true.
I think so, right? Like that is him. Exactly, right? So let's dive into that conversation of not training our technicians or not sharing with our peers or with our competitors, and I think that's a small pie mentality is what I call that, or a limited pie mentality where there's a pie that's cut into 6 pieces and there's only 6 pieces and there's 10 of us, and somebody's going to lose out, right? That is a business mindset that's been around for a long time by a segment of the business world, including in corporate, like all the way up to the top of big corporations. I think it's partially a human condition. if we go way back to early existence of human beings, I'm sure we fought over the antelope we shot and who gets the best part of the meat and that whole piece. But and again, maybe your audience is wondering why we're going down this path. But working with my friend Bruce, who studies leadership, psychology, human neurology, and stuff like that, there's actually in his research 5 different brain wirings, and we as human beings have different ways of interacting with each other that served us back in the day when we were hunter-gatherers, that served us when agriculture developed and we became farmers, that then served us as we grew cities. And so as we lived in different contexts, I'm interested to find out what he thinks about what's happening with TikTok and the kids that are, like he has a grandchild now that's, got a phone in her hand, like at 1, right? So I'm interested as to what the neurology comes up in 20 years if we're still around to find that out. But what he's discovered is this is not a personality trait. This is actually a brain wiring where there's some individuals are I give you this, you give me that. It's a very reciprocal, and we keep track of it. Like we got this mental ledger about you did this for me and we keep track of that, right? There's a group that are very much with the commute, like their immediate group. So their family, their extended family, and we will look after them. But anybody else outside of that is an outsider, right? So then you think of the Highlander Scottish people or the Irish, right? They had their tribal, and wars were fought over names and colors of tartans and stuff, right? And apparently, I went to some American boarding schools growing up, so I do know quite a bit of your history. A lot of folks in the eastern states and the Appalachians come from the Highlands of Scotland and Ireland, and they were cattle or rustlers there, and now they're moonshine makers here, right? There's a direct historical connection to behaviors, over the 500 years in terms of that family clan, the clan piece, right? So then you have authoritarian mentality, the ones that go top down, right? Sort of the general, the lieutenants, and all that kind of stuff. And the interesting thing about the authoritarian brain is it's not that everybody wants to be the authority. They just want it to work that way. So you can actually have a junior shop helper, right, whose job is just to clean up after the technicians, who has a brain wiring for authoritarianism, will hate it if the rules aren't followed the way the boss laid them out. That stresses them out, right? And then you have this other more complex person who, I'll do you a favor, Jay, you will do Carm a favor over at his podcast, and then right. Carm will do a favor to, one of the other coaches, and that coach will help me, right? Our brains can sort of handle the complexity of multiple deals at a distance and that kind of stuff. And then he goes on to one that goes into appreciating art and the whole idea of just the universe and beauty and all that kind of stuff. I mean, so we really got into the weeds here with neurology. But the thing about that is when you understand that, he says people can learn. You can stretch your brain neurons, right? Like you can actually teach yourself new ways of looking. And so when somebody understands how somebody thinks, you can then relate and you can talk to that person that way. So what I'm getting at is in our industry, there is a pie that can be grown. Right? There is lots of cars being driven by the driving public. All of these cars need repairs and maintenance. Just because you're not getting enough at your shop doesn't mean that there's not enough cars out there, right? There's talk about recession now, which is hugely irritating to me because I think most of it is self-fulfilling prophecy. Right. If we would just stop talking about it and just live, let's just see where things landed.
That doesn't sell ads, though.
Right? Doesn't sell news. I know. I get myself in big trouble. But I do, when I'm working with, I would not be a good pundit on a financial show or CNN, right? I'd get kicked off because I'm saying that there's no recession. Like, Murray, the sky is falling, and Murray's saying, no, the sky is not falling. But here's the line that I use with my clients. So the economy has shrunk 1%, okay? That's a term that the economists use. And your shop business shrank 50%. I said, there's not a direct correlation. There's other issues there, right? Like either all of your database works in a factory that got closed because of the recession. Okay, that might be a direct correlation in one tiny community, right? But when you have the right mix of clients from the right walks of life and stuff like that, if the recession goes 1%, you might go down 1 to 5% in your business, right? Like that's what I'm saying is we can do that. But back to the pie. The biggest opportunity, absolutely biggest opportunity, Jay, is that when we measure this industry, and I'm going to go with the higher number that's been done more recently in the States versus Canada, is that on average, we as shops bill out 5.3 billed hours per technician per day. That's what we bill out of an 8-hour day. So then where do we go from there? Like why is it 5.3 out of an 8-hour day? Well, every technician loses roughly an hour verbally communicating with advisors about the workflow process. But because it happens in 1-minute intervals, in 2-minute intervals, and 3-minute conversations, we don't notice that it adds up to a whole hour. We now have paper and digital technology to help technicians and advisors communicate, professionally about the workflow process. Now, I'm not taking away the visiting and the fun. I'm not talking about, right. We can talk about hockey scores or the girlfriend dumped me, or we can talk about the weather. I'm good with having a good morale and that kind of stuff. But when it comes to the workflow process, it's digitized or it's paper, and we can follow it. So we lose an hour there. We lose an hour by doing too many menu-priced items, right? Oil changes by themselves, tire changeovers by themselves, without other work attached to it. So those, it takes a technician, to do a really good oil change. I call them maintenance services, by the way, because oil change, you can't compete on price on those, but on a maintenance service you can, right? But even on a maintenance service, it takes a technician 0.7 to do a good one. The shop might be billing out 0.2 or 0.3 in dollars, right? And even good shops are only billing out 25 to 30% of the time on an actual maintenance service, right? So that kind of stuff eats away at the build hours. So the technicians are working. By the way, when I say 5.3 an 8-hour day, the technicians are working 8 to 10 hours a day. They're actually working on cars, right? And then we have things like quoting a brake job on my truck. If you look up in Mitchell, it says 1 hour to read the pads. But then if you click on a couple more little buttons in the labor guide, it says add 0.2 per hub to clean the hub surfaces. And then it adds 0.5 for burnishing the brakes and test drive confirm repair, which now takes a 1 hour brake job to 1.9. Well, how many people actually are using labor guides, or are they doing menu price brake jobs for an hour and kicking them out the door, right? So there's another bit of time that's lost there. And then another really big one is getting paid for testing, inspections, and stuff like that. Somebody brings in their vehicle with a check engine light, and somehow we feel like we have to do that first half hour for free because apparently the neighboring shop does that too, right? So these things don't happen in large chunks of time. They happen in moments, right? Waiting for the advisor. Here's another really big one, right? You can't grow the pie unless you actually put in ingredients. You have one advisor service advising for 5 technicians that are writing 20 work orders a day. Get them in, get them out, get them in, get them out, get them in, get them out. I mean, that's their day, right?
Right.
So what happens? You get one service per work order, one concern, one squeak, one leak, whatever that the clients have brought in. As soon as you bring in a second advisor and a third advisor with 5 technicians, now they're building a relationship with the client. They're going over the inspection process. They're talking about the maintenance. They're talking about the rest of the need. They're spending time asking the client, hey, do you have any other concerns with your vehicle? You see, what we do in the industry, somebody brings in their car, I'm here for my maintenance service. I'm here for my oil change. Oh, great. Thank you. Is there anything else? Or would you like anything else? Well, what's the customer going to say? No, I'm at a shop. I don't want anything else. Just the oil change, right?
I want to spend as little money as possible and get out of here without a painful conversation. Yeah.
Right. But if you rephrase the question, and say, hey, Jay, before you leave, any other concerns with your vehicle? Like, have you noticed any rattles, any noises, any leaks? Is there anybody else that drives the vehicle that may have mentioned any concerns with the vehicle? And all of a sudden you stop and you go, oh, yeah, that's right. There was a leak on my driveway. Or oh, you know what? My horn didn't work last time I used it. When I rephrase the question, all of a sudden you're like, oh, yeah, you're right. Well, would you like us to look into that horn, Jay? We need an authorization for $45 to do the testing to find out. Well, yeah, I need my horn, don't I? Right? And away you go. And you know what that does? That's 0.4 per work order. And the feedback from clients is, oh, this is such good service. You guys look after me. So they're actually spending, when you add the labor, the labor side of 0.4. So let's say your labor rate's $100 an hour and a 50 to 50 labor to parts ratio to $200. They're literally spending $200 more and saying thank you. But when you ask them, will there be anything else? They're thinking that you're digging because, now I'm going to sell you something that I don't need. But as soon as you put it in terms that they understand symptoms that they feel, things that they're experiencing, right? I'm not going to say, hey, Jay, did your wife mention anything about the car? I would never insult you that way. But if I say, anybody else drive the vehicle, you're thinking, oh, yeah, my wife says you better get that rattle fixed or else. and you're like, well, no, but what if that rattles $300? And she's looking at you like you're getting that fixed. And you're thinking, well, I'm looking at a new golf club. And if I say yes to the rattle, I won't get the golf club. And so you somehow stick handle that whole piece with your wife and say, well, they couldn't find the problem, right?
How do you... So there's so many things as you're talking that I'm curious as to like what you coach to. And what I mean by that is one of the big things we hear from technicians, and I go right back to inspections because I agree. Mm-hmm. And this took me some time to get my mind right on in terms of the importance of inspections, not just from a financial aspect, but what your responsibility to a customer is and making sure that they know what's wrong with their vehicle. Mm-hmm. What is your take on paying a technician for doing an inspection versus not paying a technician to do an inspection?
Oh, we're going to go here, are we?
So here now we'll be on for the next 4 days. Just
right.
Talking. Yeah.
So I have worked with all kinds of different pay plans with my teams in the past. I coach people. There's the hourly wage, there's the flat rate, and there's the whole thing, right? So I've landed on a really healthy hourly rate so that we take off the financial burden off our technicians. They can pay their mortgage, they can pay for their bills, and they're coming to work for intrinsic reasons, not extrinsic reasons, right? They're coming to work to serve the client, right? Their best interest is to have a good, safe car for that client. So if I'm paying that way, then of course technicians are getting paid for inspection. It's just part of their job, right? So in a medical system, should the doctor be paid for the examination or just for the surgery? So here's the thing, right? In another business model, like outside of automotive, so this is going to be testing my Toastmaster skills. I'm actually putting myself on the spot and making something up as I go. But let's say, for example, let's take Dunkin' Donuts, all right? And so Dunkin' Donuts has a choice. Right? They can give you 3 napkins every time you buy a cup of coffee, or they can only give you 1 napkin to save cost. Because over the course of a billion napkins, like you could save probably a few $1 million across the United States, right?
Right.
Or they could give you no napkins when you buy your coffee, right? And assume that you're going to ask for it. And maybe statistically, they're only going to give napkins to half the people. But what would happen if Dunkin' Donuts assumed that everybody's going to dribble a little bit and gives us each 3 napkins, but they bumped up the price of coffee by 2 cents? Who cares, right? I'm having a good experience. My coffee's great. I've got a napkin if I need it, if I'm getting in the car. And, so that's an example of outside of that whole conversation. So let's go back into the automotive sector. If we don't pay technicians for the inspection and they're doing it on their own time, are they going to give us an ethical and honest answer? Okay. And you might think to myself, well, I'm only going to hire honest technicians. When you study history, and I'm going to talk personally about my father-in-law, my grandfather-in-law, survived World War II. They've escaped Soviet Union. They're in Germany. They're working on a farm, hand to mouth, right? In after World War II, and they're given like rations by the farmer. And we're talking they're working 12-hour days farming, like as farm hands. And the farmer owns the creek that goes through that's got the trout in it. And he would go fish in the dark and catch trout so his kids could have some protein. Mm. Now, is he a criminal? Is he going to go to hell? I mean, he became a deacon in his church when he moved to Canada after they got away from that poverty and that kind of stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like at a certain point, you're going to do something to feed your kids.
Right.
Right. And maybe that's that's a very extreme example, but that technician's got to feed his kids. So he's going to find the money somewhere, right? That's not fair to your clientele. It's not fair to put a service advisor on a sales commission because that's going to do the same thing. What happens in February now at the dealership when it's quiet, right? February is a pretty quiet month for some dealerships, and that service advisor is thinking that she's got a $1,200 mortgage coming due in her tonight,
yeah,
and she doesn't have the money. Like what's all of a sudden that car needs transmission flush, right? Like, so I have some real
not only that, it's the, like, where's that person's mind at that day? They're not, they're not going to be present when they've got financial troubles at home, and maybe they're getting spousal pressure to make sure that you're feeding the kids and to make sure that you're keeping a roof over their head. And I think so often we worry about KPIs and really trying to make sure that we hit those business objectives, which we need to have a successful business. But I think at times maybe we forget that human element is such an important piece as well. Yeah. And like something like that, I think points directly to what you're saying. Absolutely.
So to answer back to your question of how you worded your question is, what do I coach to? I think that's a really perceptive way to ask a question, Jay. I really appreciate that because we want to have a net profit of 20%. So it means we have to have a gross profit of 60%, which means we have to have X number of sales. We have to have X average work order size. We need to have sold hours per work order, right? So let's go to sold hours per work order. 1.1 doesn't do very well because you're churning a lot of work orders. There's not enough, right? And the efficiencies are not there, right? So the guideline that we work towards is 3, all right? Now, the thing that I have a hard time with some people to get across to them is we're not aiming for 3 build hours per work order. 3 build hours per work order is the result of best practices. That's where it comes from. Benchmarks don't come from a finish line. Benchmarks come from, what do best businesses do? Oh, best businesses do that to get this. So when I work with my clients, I coach to good inspections. Okay, so never mind how I pay the tech, but what is a good inspection? All right, DVIs are really helping, right? Digital inspections is really helping the client understand visually what's going on with their car. So back in the day we had paper inspections, we would talk about pencil whipping, right? You've probably heard that expression, right? Where
Absolutely.
Everything's green. Now, what did I make up a term the other day? I mean, somebody else maybe have used this term. Now I called it tablet whipping. I don't know. I made up some kind of term to come up with pencil whipping because now you have to tap the boxes, right? But the whole idea here is if a technician is doing their due diligence and inspecting the car, statistically, this is Canadian, but I bet you the States is not far off. Statistically, we have $650 per visit between 2 and 3 times a year, depending on the person's mileage and driving habits, right? So we know that given 1,000 cars, we're going to average $650 per visit of legitimate, ethical, moral work on this car, whether it's a brake job, an oxygen sensor, a transmission flush, timing belt, whatever the case may be, right? So what we do is we work towards the process. Did you do good inspections? Sure enough, we've got really good inspections happening, but I'm still only at 2, I'm not at 3. Where's my weakness? Well, my advisors. I have 1 advisor and 5 technicians. Poor thing can't keep up, so we hire another advisor. How do that's growing the pie. Now I have another salary, but you get those sold hours per work order. It pays for itself and goes into the bank at the same time, right? And then let's say, for example, you have enough advisors, but you're still not quite at where you need to be. You do an audit about their presentation skills. I never use the word sales. You're an advisor. You're a consultant. Does the person understand what they're deciding, what they're asking, what we're asking to be done in that car, right? Can you communicate the value of why we do transmission services? I have found out, and by the way, full disclosure, back to my history, I grew up working on stuff around the house with my dad because he grew up on a farm. So we did all of our own car work at home. I worked in a motorcycle shop when I was in high school. And I worked on airplanes when I was doing my pilot's license. So I worked on a lot of stuff. But I never got any licenses in it or got my degrees in it because I was always moving on to other things and ended up getting into the gas bar side. So I don't have in Canada, we have a red seal license. So I don't have a lot of book learning for automotive, right?
Right.
So I learned from a guy what causes transmission failure. And everybody says lack of maintenance. And I said, no, the physics. It's overheating. That's what causes transmission failure. So, what cools the transmission? Well, the transmission fluid, right? It's not just lubricating. Well, how does it cool it? Well, it goes out to the cooler and blows and comes back in again. And then he says, so if the fluid is foamy and bubbly, will it transfer heat as well? And I'm like, well, of course not, right? Heat transfer is going to be very bad. He said, right. So what's in transmission fluid is called anti-foaming agents. And that's the part that wears out in transmission fluid. That's why it's recommended to be changed. And I'm just like, bing, 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 bing. Like, holy Moses, I wish I would have known that when I had my shop. I could have sold like 10 times more of them because I was always doing it on color and condition. And a lot of transmission rebuilders will tell you, it's too late, buddy.
Yeah, if
right?
it's black, that's how I was raised too. If the tranny fluid's black, you're not in a good spot.
Right. But we always felt like it was unethical to change fluid that was still pink. Right?
Right.
I mean, back in our day, it was pink. I mean, I don't know, maybe there's other colors these days now. I've heard that there are other colors of fluids now, right? But
right.
And so Jay, I don't teach technical training. I only use one technical example in my training, and it's that one right there. And I learned that from a fellow named Wes. And I tell you, when an advisor understands the ethics and the morals of saving somebody a $5,000 transmission rebuild with a $200 service, that conviction and that confidence in that service means that the majority of people will say yes, because it's not about the money for 9 out of 10 people. It's about confidence that you actually know what you're talking about. And you can explain it into terms that those people can understand. Right? It's
so true. And I had a conversation, a shop owner friend of mine, I had saw her last night and was just talking with her. Our kids both have ski lessons at the same place. And so we had, every time we see each other, we always strike up great conversation and talk through things. And we're talking about a technician transitioning into a management role and, how difficult it is for a tech to kind of change their thinking on a lot of that, where maybe in the past they had fought against inspections because they didn't think it was the right thing to do. But when you sit down and you think about it, you're the doctor, you're not withholding information on the physical, right? You're telling them what's wrong with them, because if you don't, they could die. I think it's the same thing.
Well, I use an example like this. I mean, it's kind of horrific to some people. I mean, I lost my dad to prostate cancer, but so the doctor does a blood test, does an exam, right, and finds out. So he tells you that your blood sugar is high, your cholesterol is high. Here's pills for that. But he sees that the antigens in your blood for prostate are going up, but he's too afraid to tell you because that's yucky and that's scary and that's cancer, right? Well, you know what happened in that world? That's a class action lawsuit. That's a malpractice lawsuit in a heartbeat.
Right.
Right. Here's the interesting thing, and I haven't confirmed this with an attorney per se. This is based on reading. If North American consumers knew their rights,
we'd be in trouble.
Way more. We'd be in trouble as an industry because we're not doing our due diligence. See, here's the part that technicians and advisors and owners misunderstand. You're not obligated to make the sale. You're obligated to inform and to educate and ask for a decision, and then you document the decision. Yes, I'd love to go ahead with that transmission service. That makes a lot of sense to me. I would love that you put the heavier, more expensive rotors on because I tow a trailer. I get that. Thank you. Please go ahead. Absolutely not. My dad told me that transmission flushes are a ripoff. I don't want it done. No problem, sir. Can you just initial here that you've declined it? Well, why do I need to initial? Well, I just explained to you that it protects from overheating, and you've decided not to do that, and I'd just like you to acknowledge that I told you that. That's all, sir. You don't have to buy anything from me. I just want you to understand that I've done that. And then the person goes, yeah, no problem, because he's a cheapskate or whatever. Or he goes, now I have to initial it? Maybe you should probably do that service, right?
If you're enjoying Beyond the Wrench, remember to follow and rate our podcast to help support the show. Right now, we would like to give a shout out to this week's sponsor, Universal Technical Institute. Since 1965, Universal Technical Institute has trained thousands of students to pursue their dreams. If you want to train for an exciting career in transportation, skilled trades, or energy, UTI may be the school for you. You'll learn how to work with tools and equipment from some of the world's top brands like BMW, Ford, General Motors, Daimler Trucks, and more. That's why many of these brands recruit UTI grads when hiring. Develop your skills in state-of-the-industry labs. Train in a blended learning format designed to mirror the industry. You can graduate in less than a year, and their career services department is here to support grads as they launch their careers. UTI has a national reputation with a variety of programs to choose from at campuses across the country. You'll learn the skills you need in a hands-on environment that doesn't feel like a traditional school. See how you can get started today. Disclaimer: some programs may require longer than 1 year to complete. UTI is an educational institution and cannot guarantee employment or salary.
Now, let me just go to something a bit more positive from a consumer standpoint that DVIs are really helping. Is we used to always tell people what was wrong with their car because that's all we had time for. You need brakes, you need ball joints, you need this, you need that, right? Because, and we rarely talked about the good stuff. Now with DVIs, all the brands I'm familiar with, green is always the first thing that opens up for that customer. And so I got advisors out there that are like, hey, Jay, I got to tell you about your car. It got an A- today, man. You should see it's got 83 green check marks. It's in really good shape. We've got these 2 red items here that we'd like to go over with you, that our technician has identified that we'd like to go over with you and explain what it needs. And we've got this 1 yellow item here that, we can plan for down the road. We don't have to necessarily do that today, right? And even if the brand of digital inspection is in the green, yellow, red order, because a lot of them are, right. We have learned from best practices, and I just learn and listen and pass it on, that we jump to the red, green first, jump to the red, and then yellow after. Because when you talk yellow first, people are listening about pricing and about planning, and then you jump to the red, and now they're confused. So they jump around a little bit. So if you go straight to the red, you get closure on the red, you understand what you need, and then we go to the yellow and plan for that. And the odd customer who's got cash flow, doesn't want to come back again, will say, you know what, let's just do that yellow thing at the same time now. And right. Jay, you had clients like that, right? They're not your whole database, but there's a segment of people that don't want to come back again, right? So the idea of telling people what's good about their car is revolutionizing sales in shops. Because I'm looking at a $30,000 vehicle, a $40,000 vehicle, $50,000 vehicle, but I've lost perspective of the value of that vehicle because I make payments on it, right? And so now you present me with $2,500 or $3,000 worth of work, of problems on this car. I'm looking, for whatever reason, I've lost track of that. I'm thinking of $2,000. I'm looking at that piece of junk out there going, I'm not going to invest $2,000 into that. But if you tell me that it got a B plus or an A minus, and it's still, almost as good of a car as the day that you bought it, all of a sudden that $2,000 is this worthwhile investment into keeping that thing running and not replacing it, right? I wish I could give credit to the gentleman on a podcast that I was listening to. I wasn't a guest, a service advisor turned service advisor trainer, and he was presenting a gentleman with a $4,000 estimate, and the gentleman says, I'm just going to sell this and buy a new vehicle. And the advisor was very professional, said, so what are you thinking about buying? Have you taken a look around? Well, I was thinking about buying such and such a vehicle. The advisor says, those running around 50,000 or so-ish? Yeah, depending on the features and stuff, the customer said. So the advisor turned to the customer and said, so you're solving a $4,000 problem with a $50,000 solution, sir? And I'm just kind of like, I wish I would have known that in my day, service advising. Because not to be mean, we don't need to be mean, but we need to help our clients have wake-up calls, because most people are not that good with money and they're not good with math. Let's just be honest. It's not something that is taught very well, and that we all learn fairly late in life, right? For many people. I mean, obviously there's some people that are very strong with that. So when you help somebody with the perspective of it, all of a sudden their perspective changes. Here's an example I use with a client today. I have a watch that my daughter bought me for a gift. I have an estimated idea of what it costs. I have never checked or whatever, but it needed a new battery. I've replaced hundreds of watch batteries in my life for family members, my kids, my wife, everything. But I've learned my lesson after I broke a bezel on one of hers, that there's certain kinds that you don't do at home because you need a special tool, right, so you don't break the glass. Well, I recognized with my gift for my daughter that this is one. So I took it to a department store here in Canada, and my bill by the time I was done was $29. So I don't think the watch is much more than $300. Let's just guess between $150 and $300, just without offending her. I'm hoping she'll never hear this, but I mean, it's a. By the way, just I love it, not because it's for my daughter, but it's a DC-3 watch, the airplane, and that's my favorite airplane. Like I never ever got a chance to fly one, but that was the workhorse of the Air Force in World War II, and it's the workhorse today still. Like in Alaska, you still have DC-3s, Northern Canada, right? So it's a really cool watch. So I paid $30. I paid 10% of the value of that to have that watch work. Right. So what's the 10% value of a $50,000 car? It's $5,000.
Yeah, $5,000.
And luckily for us, most of the time, we don't have to spend $5,000 in a year at one time if we look after it. Right. So that's the other disservice that our industry has done, Jay, is we fell down a commodity price-based trap 80, 90 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's the trap we fell into. We taught the driving public that it's about price and not about value. And that's the heartbreak. And you know, I'm basically unwinding it one shop owner at a time. You know, maybe I'll get a few hundred before I retire. But the thing about those shop owners is regardless of the problems, systemic issues in the industry, those shop owners have a retirement plan. They have savings now. They've got college money for their kids and their grandkids. And I feel really good about that because I might not be able to rescue the industry, but I can definitely make dozens of people's lives better by having this information and this knowledge, right? So
I say that a lot, that in some ways we were punished by our ancestors in this business because they set us so far behind other industries when, you know, Henry Ford was just getting things kicked off that it really it's put us behind in a lot of ways. And it's taken us, you know, up until, I would say, you know, even up until 20 years ago, 10 years ago, I still think we were really far behind. And I think we're gaining there, but man, that dampen our ability to be able to get good talent. And you know, if we're not charging enough, then we're hard to pay somebody.
If I've got an extra minute here, I'll explain.
Absolutely.
What I believe.
It's all on your schedule, by the way. As we record, this is a Friday afternoon. This is my last meeting until the weekend, so it's free reign to have you talk however long you want to.
I have a little dog that just got let out. I don't know if you heard a little squeaking in the background there. I do have to take him out for his little walk here shortly.
Absolutely.
So here's my view on and this is, and I think this is one skill, one gift that I've been given of how my brain works is I read one thing over here and I read one thing over there and I read a third thing over here and all of a sudden, boom, I get this picture. Boom, like, oh, that's why, right? Because I connect the dots, right? So new car dealers was the most common business model in the early 1900s, right, of selling cars. Gas stations was the other early business model in the early 1900s, okay? The one number that I have is that new car dealers only had 12% of the market share of car repair in the 60s. The other 88% went to garages, right? And I've talked to people from historically, and they said we didn't care. We just sold cars.
Right.
Margin was good. In fact, I know of a family. I know the granddaughter of a GM dealer in Ontario, and she said her grandfather built two bays because GM made him to do warranty. Okay. Now think about what a technician is viewed like at a new car dealer in that scenario.
Right.
Purely
yes.
Cost, an anchor, right? We make huge margin on cars. I'm forced to do warranty, and it costs me money. So you, my friend, are an anchor. So you know what I'm going to do to manage my expenses? I'm going to put you on flat rate piecework, so I only have to pay you if that. And we're going to manage those times till the cows come home so that it doesn't cost the manufacturer that much either. And it's even getting worse now. I mean, the times they give those techs now is just horrendous, right? Now think about a gas station. All right, we sell fuel. Margins were great back in those days, and we repaired cars. Who pumped the gas? Think of the stereotype of a 50s movie. Technicians during the day, right? There was high school kids, like, you know, American, whatever was that movie back in my day in the 70s. Anyways, gas jockeys in the evening and the weekends were kids, high school kids that would hang out there and stuff. But during the day, it was technicians. What do you think the ding-ding hose was for?
Right.
So that I could be interrupted for the umpteenth time on my brake job to go pump some gas. So how am I viewed in that industry? I'm a glorified gas jockey. I'm an expensive gas jockey, right? I was literally told by a mentor that I say that very sarcastically. When my first location with bays, I had one location without, and then I got location with bays. In '89, I was already running one of my own. This guy told me that if you charge enough labor that pays your technician wages, you're doing good because you make money on gas. That's a gross profit of zero. So think of that philosophy of somebody who was teaching me in '89. So to me, the issue came from the franchise dealer model, the franchise fuel model. We made great profit on cars. We made great profit on fuel. Technicians were constantly a burden, a labor cost, and so we had to manage them, and we never understood time. We never understood labor standards. So to me, that's the trauma, if you want to use some modern psychological term, that is filtered down through the generations that our technicians today are bearing the brunt of, and that's the part that I'm going to tell my dying breath I'm going to work at turning that around.
It is very true. We were going through, my dad had a box of old Mitchell manuals, or I don't remember which they were, but the old service guides, right? The labor guides. And I think it wasn't like that long ago. I mean, it was probably from the 60s or the 70s, and the labor rate was minuscule. And when I say minuscule, it was nothing, right? Like it was, I was shocked that even in that, like the 60s or 70s, it would be that low. And I actually think this is like 3 or 4 years ago when I saw that, and I took a picture of it and put it on social media, because I'm like, this is what our issue was all along.
Yeah.
We were charging so little to repair vehicles back then that we've had to catch up, and it's put us in a really bad spot. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Speaking of labor guides, and maybe this will be my final word. Man, you got me going here. You got me going here. Whenever I do my courses, I will ask the room, how many of you have been formally taught by a manager, a coach, a boss, how to use a labor guide? And generally, I might get 1 hand out of 20, right? So it's 5% of people have learned how to use labor, because they're all digital now, and you can't always find the instructions there, right? So you know how you would have a time refuel pump 1.9, and beside that is a letter C. Do you know, that would put you on a spot, Jay? Do you know what letter C is?
I don't know what that letter C is, no.
It's the skill level of the technician.
I didn't know that.
So in the guides, different brands have different ratings, like Mitchell, Chilton, Motor. Some have an A, B, and a C. Some have an A, B, C, and a D. So an A tech, highly skilled, highly experienced, B tech is, experienced, but, this kind of thing. And the C tech is an apprentice in training. All right. So I will then say to people, okay, so the book time says 1.9. I also teach people to add a factor for age of vehicle, for, rust and corrosion and stuff like that. So let's say we bumped the thing up to 2.2, and it says a level C. Would we expect a level C apprentice to get that done in 2.2 hours? We would hope they would. What would we expect an A-level technician to do that job in?
Half that time?
Half that time. Okay. So now, how many shops owners, when they're at the counter, are terrified to charge the 2.2 because the customer just watched the technician do it in 1?
Everyone.
Everyone's terrified. I used to be terrified, right? Until I got taught by Bob O'Connor how the labor guides work. So the role play he taught me, which I only did twice with some bullies. You could explain to people, and people didn't hang around and watch. Like, it's a trusting relationship. But what I tell people is, so let me go to the role play of Bob, and then let me go to the numbers calculation of this, right? So the role play would be, so the customer would come in and say, so how do you charge here, right? Would you like to do the flat rate, like by the book? Like, I'm only going to pay the time it takes, right? And I'm like, well, sir, I've given you an estimate here for a total, all in. I said, and I commit to that, 100%. It's going to be this or less. I said, but the rate I charge per hour will depend on who I assign it to. Well, what do you mean? I said, well, I've got Susan over here. She's a 20-year veteran. She'll probably get this job done in an hour, hour and a quarter. I've got Jay over here. He's a first-year apprentice, does great work. He's very, very clean and neat and very reliable. It might take him 6 hours to do it, because this will be the first time he's doing it. So, sir, who would you like to work on your vehicle today?
That's great.
Right? Well, I want Susan. I said, so you're okay paying $102 an hour versus $55 an hour, right? See, we can't do different labor rates in our world because of all the multiple kinds of things we do. Right. In the plumbing world, at least in Canada, when you take a look at most plumbers and electricians' bills, they have 8 hours of a journeyman, 100. 6 hours of a fourth-year apprentice is 80, and 7 hours of a first-year apprentice is 45. I actually got a bill from an environmental engineering firm that a client of mine's having his property assessed for sale, and it's exactly laid out. Head engineer is $500 an hour, junior engineers are $250, right? So in the world of straight time, they have different rates. In our world, we had to menu price water pumps and brakes and stuff like that. The labor guides were actually intended for us to assume that a better tech is going to do it faster. We just quote the price, we quote the price, we quote the price. So one technician is at 104 an hour. But think about it. If Susan does the next one in not an hour and a quarter, maybe in an hour and a half, because there's one more bolt that got a little bit rustier, we're not going to change the quote to the customer, and we're not going to change the rate. But it would be impossible to change the rate because we don't know how long it's going to take Susan to do that job. I hope that's all making sense to you and to everybody, right? So these guides were designed. So that's one thing the founding fathers did right, is how to use a labor guide, but most people don't know how to use it, right?
That's incredible. I just learned that now. I had no idea.
Yeah. That is revolutionizing people's emotional bank accounts when charging properly for the time. If a technician, you would expect a technician to beat the time. What other job in North America do you get paid less for doing it faster and better? Tell me that.
Right.
There isn't a job out there that if you do faster and better, you get paid less. Yet somehow we've taught the consumer to use these guys as a weapon against us, right? Come to my shop, I'll do it for a lower labor rate. Come to my shop, I'll use book time and not whatever, right? Like, crazy.
It's trying to get around the mindset that we're racing to the bottom, I think, is such an important piece. And, we've got good quality people in our shops. And in a lot of ways, it's just time we start acting like it. I think that's one of the downfalls of our industry right now, I feel like, is not maybe knowing the value of those folks. And we talk about, what we pay techs and that kind of thing, but it is just the confidence you have in that customer conversation and knowing with your heart that these are pretty talented people and we shouldn't be ashamed to charge for it.
And using systems to manage the time. It's actually, you don't actually have to have an exorbitantly high rate. You just have to get your rate for everything you do. And that has to do with systems. Most of the time it's actually systems and not selling, right? So why does a technician have to wait for 10 minutes to talk to the advisor? That would be 10 minutes gone. That same technician now comes back from lunch and the part's not there because there's only one advisor and they couldn't order the part on time. And then, now there's no proper phone skills for authorization. And so now we're waiting on the client to authorize the job and we don't have a system to follow up with that client for authorization, right? So there's another 10 minutes. So there's 20 minutes that happened in Mario the mechanic's day. That has nothing to do with his skill, his ability, his intensity of anything. And that's the part that I love helping people find those leaks in their businesses. It's not about the people, it's about the systems, and you fix the system. You can't fix people. We are who we are.
Right.
I believe. We can learn, we can get better, but you can't fix people.
Well, in learning, and I'll let you go here soon, but this was one of the things that I do remember when I worked for a manufacturer. We did a lot of the Kaizen and kind of that really just monitoring things and seeing how things work. And one of the things that we did was spaghetti charts in a shop. And basically you just draw lines every time a technician would walk somewhere, right? And you'd draw lines. One of the funny stories that we learned, and you learned so much just by sitting and watching, and you had to kind of get through the technicians being awkward or weirded out by the fact that you're just sitting there watching them. But like there was this one shop we were in and I was drawing the spaghetti chart and I noticed every time they were doing an oil change, they would walk all the way to the back of the shop, then walk all the way back up, and they were getting an oil filter wrench. And I had asked the owner, I'm like, so why don't you just buy another oil filter wrench and put it up there? It's super cheap. And how many steps you're missing in between? It's just something that was so simple, but unless you sit out there and monitor it, it's like, I love it. And it's just like, that makes total sense. I just didn't know that was happening. Yeah.
Yeah. My big aha with somebody, when I first started coaching, I kept asking questions and they kept pushing back. And I finally said, so what's the reason why you can't do this? And he said, because we only have one terminal and me and the advisor have to share it. And I'm just kind of like, Really? So buy another computer, dude.
We can figure these things out.
Like as a I have to admit, there's days as a coach I make mistakes and I don't ask enough questions, or I don't ask the right questions to find out what's actually the issue. The actually is that they need another terminal. Like, oh my goodness, right? But thanks for that. Yeah, that whole thing that I just wrote down spaghetti chart because I've actually never heard that expression. So you taught me something new today.
Well, that's good. And there's so much more we didn't get to today that we're going to have you back on, because
I'd love to.
It felt like just a normal, natural conversation that we have, and we happen to hit record on it. So I thank you so much for joining us today. And I learned a lot just sitting back and listening, and just a fantastic podcast. So I genuinely appreciate you coming on to join us.
My pleasure,
today.
Jay. And I'd be happy to come back someday. That's awesome.
Murray, how do people get in touch with you?
Oh, Murray Voth at rpmtraining.net is the email address, or just I don't know if you use the www anymore, but rpmtraining.net is the website, and there's a contact form there as well that comes straight to me. And I answer all my emails. I don't necessarily answer fast, so give me 24 hours. Give me 24 hours on an inquiry about what I do, and follow Jay. Please follow this podcast, there's other podcasts out there that we can talk about in the future. So, yeah.
Yes,
okay?
yes. Well, thank you so much again. Hope you have a great weekend, and look forward to the next time we get to talk.
Okay. Thanks, Jay. Take care.
That wraps up this week's episode of Beyond the Wrench. Be sure to tune in next week for another brand new episode. As a reminder, don't forget to rate and follow Beyond the Wrench on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps us get Beyond the Wrench in front of other fantastic shop owners, managers, technicians, and dealers just like you, so we can continue to help improve, promote, and grow this amazing industry. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back next week.